TAWAKI. You won't find them on snow and ice. They're either in the sea, under the canopy, or in between. Also called the Fiordland crested penguin, they're the second rarest penguin in the world and the only one that nests in rainforest.
TAWAKI, which perhaps I always joke is the prettiest of all the New Zealand penguins, with its reddy orange eye and its beautiful yellow crest.
Each bird is a little bit different, so you find some of them seem to be quite timid, but some of them, as I've got the scars to prove, are very protective of themselves and their nest.
I'm Patrick Phelps. We're heading down to Haast, the southernmost township on the west coast. It's the place most accessible to TAWAKI, but even from there, finding them's pretty tough. Now, New Zealand's a pretty isolated part of the world. The west coast is a pretty isolated part of New Zealand, and Haast is a pretty isolated part of the west coast. Maybe that's why TAWAKI aren't that widely known.
Becky Wilson works in the Haast area as a biodiversity ranger. One of her jobs revolves around TAWAKI. Doc recently reviewed the conservation status of New Zealand's mainland birds, TAWAKI included.
We've kind of worked out a best case and a worst case scenario, and it's sort of the best case scenario is that we'd have around about 16 to 1700 pairs remaining, and the worst case will be about 800 to 1,000 pairs, which is pretty bad. And so that's why TAWAKI have now been reclassified, because we know that we don't know exactly how fast, but it's a pretty fast decline. So we know that there's probably less than 5,000 mature individuals in total.
With the reclassification, TAWAKI have been moved from being nationally vulnerable to nationally endangered. These rankings are equivalent to the IUCN listings for species at risk. To keep the conservation status up to date, Doc's got to keep tabs on TAWAKI numbers.
This time of year is when we do the monitoring, when they're breeding. We go out and do the monitoring when they're sitting on nests, incubating eggs, so that's a busy time.
As in any tight-knit community, there's always someone to lend a hand when there's work to be done. The coast has been good to Jeff Robson over the years, and now he's keen to return the favour.
Yeah, we came here 40 years ago to shoot deer, and then when the deer industry saw a bit sad, I went fishing, and so all our lives have been fishing and hunting really along this coastal area mostly. We've done quite well, I suppose. We worked hard at it and ended up, not too badly off considering. So we've been quietly worrying away at a few things here and helping clean the coast up a bit, and like I say, we've seen the penguins from huge numbers go down to very small numbers now, so we're quite keen to see if we can help a bit there as well.
It's fantastic that a local business is prepared to step up and offer such as a lot of money that he's offering, and a lot of chopper time, flying time, which will help us with the monitoring, definitely. So the more that we can get local communities and businesses involved in helping out with, it's such a massive job to protect the amazing environments we have here in New Zealand. So it's fantastic that people like Jeff coming forward, kind of approaching Doc really, and wanting to be involved and wanting to help out because of the passion that they have for their own local environment where they live.
If we can get the penguins back to where they were, that'd be great. There used to be thousands of them on this coast, and it doesn't seem to be that number now, less the hiding, of course.
After Jeff drops the monitoring team off, they make their way to the colony to check the numbers. Each year, 2 independent teams go through and count the nest. Team 1 goes through and marks each nest they find, and Team 2 does the same, noting the nests that have and have not been found by the first team. Through mathematical calculations, population estimates are produced.
Now, obviously this can be quite a challenging job logistically.
Yes,
It's difficult terrain, it's steep. There's lots of crawling around in caves on your belly and through kiki, and yeah, it's pretty hard. I'm pretty wet and dirty now, so yeah, but it's fun. I don't think I'm going to be able to get the marker right next to the nest. I might have to put it up here.
Oh, okay.
But the challenge is to try and mark the nest so that the marker doesn't give it away for the next team.
Oh, okay.
So we want the team to find the nest and then see the marker.
How important would you say this monitoring is in terms of conservation for TAWAKI?
Well, I mean, if we don't know what's happening, we don't know what we need to conserve. You know, we need to know, are they actually in decline? If they are, how bad is it? How much resource do we need to put in? How serious is the situation? So yeah, keeping an eye on monitoring is really important.
And an important thing is, you mentioned the birds and not disrupting the birds while we're doing it.
Yeah, we want to be as careful. Like I'm trying to stay behind the rock, so I'm not disturbing him too much while I'm getting myself ready, taking the GPS point, writing the stuff down, and then when I'm ready to mark, I'll figure out how I'm going to get in there and mark that nest as close as possible. Doc was concerned TAWAKI monitoring might be disturbing the penguins, to the point where nests were being abandoned and chicks weren't hatching. On top of taking extra care when monitoring, they've also tested to make sure breeding isn't being upset. So we did some research, put in little temperature loggers into the nests when we came through marking them. And then we could go back and recover those temperature loggers. Once the birds had left at the end of the breeding season, we went through with metal detectors and dug them back out of the nests, and we could tell from the temperature whether the bird had stayed incubating or left and come back. But we found from the data loggers that pretty much most of them did come back. We were confident that we weren't causing significant abandonment. So I'm also, while I'm doing this, trying to see if he's got any eggs or not. And I can see one, definitely. Let me give it a quick spot spray with stock marker that is kind of, I guess, safe for animals.
Territorial birds, aren't they?
Yes. And they've all got a different personality. Some of them sit really still when you do that. Some of them get upset and occasionally do run away. But the other ones like that will have a quick peck at you.
We're in South Westland learning about TAWAKI, the world's second rarest penguin. The adults start arriving back at the breeding colony in June. They spend a few weeks choosing their nests, renewing the pair bond, and getting the house in order. After mating, the eggs are laid, mostly at the start of August. With TAWAKI, they actually lay 2 eggs usually, and they'll start incubating only after the second egg has been laid. And it seems that the first egg tends to be smaller than the second egg and is probably an insurance, because usually that chick, it will hatch later than the second egg, and more often than not will die at some point and not survive. TAWAKI usually only have 1 chick surviving through till fledging, so it looks like that other chick is just a bit of a backup for if anything happens, if there's a predation or something at the nest. Most TAWAKI return to the same colony every year, with a high rate of loyalty to their nest as well as their mates. TAWAKI, once they start breeding, have a really high fidelity to the colony once they've decided where they're going to breed, and also to particular nest sites unless there's some kind of event that destroys that nest sites. And around about 60 to 65% of the birds will find the same partner again and mate and breed together. And I think the studies showed that for those birds that did go back to the same site and also the same partner, they had a higher breeding success than if they kind of started to do something new in that season. But also the reasons for splitting up
if they were going to split up from their partner, it tended to be if they'd had a poor breeding season the year before, then maybe they might split up. And it appears that the females, I think, are slightly more likely to separate from the males than the other way around.
TAWAKI have made a home on the coast, and they're not the only ones. The region lays claim to some of New Zealand's highest peaks and its highest rainfall. It's hard to believe some parts have been seen by human eyes, let alone touched by human hands.
As beautiful and remote as this place is, it's not as untouched as you might think.
Jerry McSweeney and his wife Anne Saunders have had their wilderness lodge at Meraki for 24 years. Both a tourist operator and a conservationist, he's well aware of the impacts mankind has had on the land and on TAWAKI.
Well, we came here because through the 1980s I'd been involved in promoting a World Heritage Area for the southwest of New Zealand as a way of recognising just how special this whole area through to Fiordland was and why we needed to protect the forests, not build roads, and celebrate the wildlife and the trees. We looked for a mascot really of this area, and we saw the TAWAKI, the Fiordland crested penguin, as a fantastic symbol of a bird that the only penguin that lives in temperate rainforest. It's only found in the southwest corner of New Zealand, and really how it fares is a pretty good indicator of how we're going to look after this place. This is a bird that lives up to 1 kilometre from the seacoast and nests under the rainforest. So anything that involved clearing coastal rainforest, whether it was for farming, for houses, for roads, was a problem with TAWAKI. All through the 1980s we campaigned to get these forests protected from logging, and we succeeded, and in 1990 this area became a World Heritage Site right through to Fiordland that permanently protects all these forests. But of course prior to that there'd been things like the Jacksons Bay Road that was built down to the wharf there that they exported timber. And I think in constructing that road in the 1960s, there probably was disturbance of TAWAKI colonies.
Another industry causing problems for TAWAKI is one Jerry depends on, but one he knows should be managed.
The uncontrolled tourism where people go down to Munro's Beach needs to be really well managed to make sure that those birds aren't disturbed by people. And that's something that we're working on with the Department of Conservation, because the signage has been inadequate and people have been going right up to where the birds walk into their breeding colonies, and those birds are frightened. So they're stressed, and there's some evidence that they're not breeding as well there as they used to.
We know that TAWAKI are quite sensitive to disturbance, and there's a real concern, especially during the period when the adults are coming backwards and forwards to feed the chicks, that if they are seeing people in their way on the beach, they won't come in. They'll stay out at sea, or they'll stay in the colony, and they won't make that beach crossing, and that can or could lead to the chicks ending up malnourished if they're not fed regularly enough. It's really difficult for the chicks out there anyway, and if they're going out to sea when they fledge slightly underweight, then they're going to have really big issues with their survival. So.
Jerry believes increased signage and having a ranger present in the area will reduce TAWAKI disturbance. I took a walk to see if the tourists think people would ignore the current signage.
I can imagine they would, yeah.
It's tempting to, but it is tempting to, but perhaps, I don't know, maybe a bit more of a, maybe if they had more of a sign with more information as to why you shouldn't go past the point, it might help a little bit more.
Munro's Beach is one of the most visited places by tourists coming to see the TAWAKI, but the only thing guaranteed for most is a good walloping by the sandflies. This sign here is the only thing stopping any tourists going further up the beach and approaching the penguins.
And do you think if they had people here stopping you, or
maybe fines if you like heavy fines if you were caught going past and that sort of thing? Do you think that would reduce people going past it? And
Well,
Yeah.
because it's so remote, I think if you see that there's this person not monitoring it, they do it
Yeah.
anyway, because you're not going to get caught, are you? So I think fines wouldn't work.
I reckon a lot more, maybe appealing to people, the human nature of people, and if you had some more information explaining in what way it's specifically going to affect the penguins, then it might have a bit more effect, because, yeah.
It would be nice to have someone here telling you every now and then.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. But it might affect that remote,
Yeah, that's
hidden
true.
gem aspect to
Yeah,
it as well.
that's true. Yeah.
I suppose in a way, it'd be lovely if we could just have these penguins completely left alone. But in fact, what we do know is that people will go looking for them. People will disturb them. Like all the penguins, there's a lot of people want to see them. And I think the challenge that we face as West Coasters and New Zealanders is to share those birds with people, but not to the extent that the birds themselves suffer. And right from the start of the lodge here, we've worked with the Department of Conservation and the community through a community group which helped build things like Munro Track, Ship Creek, the Knights Point viewing platforms and the Haas Visitor Centre. And the goal's been to have places that penguins can just do their thing totally undisturbed, and then other places where people can see them under controlled conditions so that the birds are not disturbed by the people. And part of that obviously has been that we take guided trips to see penguins. So I think that's been the real challenge, is to sort of manage people so that they can get a rewarding experience, but it doesn't harm the birds. Now, all of those things wouldn't happen if we didn't have a visitor industry providing some sort of revenue to do those things. And I mean, when you look at this area, it's a fabulous World Heritage Site, and those people are all putting money into this area that helps the Department of Conservation look after penguins.
We're looking at TAWAKI, the rainforest penguin, and the challenges they face. One of the most devastating of which doesn't come directly from man, but man's best friend.
We know definitely that dogs do kill penguins, and one dog can wreak a huge amount of havoc through a colony. It can go on one nest after another. There's been incidents of sort of 10 or more nests the birds being killed by dogs.
And in the early 80s, a dog did just that. A local policeman who was going for a walk down to the beach came through this creek and found a colony of TAWAKI that had been throttled to death by a dog. When he got to the beach, there were signs someone had been in the area all day, and their dog was free to roam far and wide. He said he found upwards of 10 dead TAWAKI in the bush, on the banks, and in the creek, and he didn't find any left alive.
You may think, oh, my dog isn't going to do much harm, but it only takes a few minutes for it to go and kill a lot of birds, because they're kind of nesting in fairly close proximity. If it finds one nest, it probably will have found up to 20 in a really short space of time.
Prior to us coming here, the Wildlife Act said that if your dog killed a penguin, you committed an offence. But it wasn't an offence to actually take your dog into a penguin colony. And so what we realised is that you needed to have a legal protection for those birds, whereby people just couldn't take dogs into those colonies. And that was really important. That took 4 years, and in 1994 we had the Jackson's Head Wildlife Refuge and the Whakapauai Wildlife Refuge established here, which essentially everything west of Highway 6 here, you can't take a dog. And there's been about 5 different court cases where people were caught with dogs, and the fines were pretty substantial, and people got the message to leave their dogs at home.
As for the next generation of TAWAKI, all going well, in 5 years' time, they'll have chicks of their own and have a life expectancy of 20 years. But what of the species as a whole?
Reclassifying TAWAKI is, and giving it a higher threat status, is going to give us the opportunity to invest more resources in it, because it steps up its priority as to what management we might do. But the first thing we need to do is figure out what can we do, what is going wrong and what can we do.
With Tawaki's life cycle spread between the ocean and the land, we've got to understand there's really two different systems there. My understanding at this stage is there's not a significant human-caused death rate of penguins out there. I'm sure they get eaten by sharks and various other things, but we don't have much control over that. On the land, Tawaki are quite vulnerable to a range of impacts. I think there's a huge advantage in having people spread around the remote parts of New Zealand with their businesses dependent upon looking after the forests and the wildlife. If you don't have those people, it would be much more difficult to know what's going on. And we've really valued the sort of responsibility of being able to live here, enjoy all these things, and also be a part of making sure that they're there for the future.
There's a lot we don't know about Tawaki and a lot we need to know. But one thing's for certain, we'll have to take extra care to make sure they continue returning to these shores and to their nests for years to come.